watching it right now.
Check, check, 1, 2, check, check, 1, 2. It's about a 30-second delay. Check, check, 1, 2, check,
Perfect.
check, 1, 2.
Thank you.
Hey, Madison, can you send me the link? Can you send me, and I'll monitor it as well, please?
Yes.
Thanks.
Right? Okay.
That's yours and it's on, ready to go.
Okay.
No, I'm running multiple cameras. You're fine. All right.
Preston, you're lucky you didn't get the, I'll be up there tomorrow.
Yeah.
And don't ask me again.
Yeah.
Now you want to know that
There you go.
All right, well, a big thank you to Kevin Glenn for that piano. So, welcome to a special we have to get this. Hold it further away. Okay. So let's see if this works. How's that? I'm going to be on your left, Biff. So Biff and I are good friends, but not quite that good. Maybe I should stand behind you. Okay, we'll try again. Hopefully this is better. Okay. So this afternoon, you're here for a very special afternoon because we're going to share history, anecdotes, memories, and maybe some tall tales. We're going to have fun. We're going to celebrate who we are and how we got here. We're going to hear from the people who made it happen and those who had a front row seat. It's going to be great. So I'm John Crane. I'm the mayor of Carefree, and I'm as excited as can be to be here. And I love this town, and I'm sure all of you do too. And you're just eager to hear, as much as I am, the history about what happened before we got here. So tonight we have an interesting program. We're going to hear from distinguished guests in an interview-style presentation. So Preston, Westmoreland will interview our guests. And then afterwards, we'll open it up to questions and comments. And then we'll retreat to the kitchen, to the restaurant, for some hors d'oeuvres, which are like 1980s vintage style hors d'oeuvres. Yeah, they'll be a little bit fresher, okay? And I've been told that the chef had, maybe, I don't know yet, but, and I'm told the chef had a great time putting them together, so that'll be fun. So stick around for that. There's wine and some water and so forth. And then you can mingle and chat with our panelists. So first, I'd like to start and introduce some special guests that we have here today in the audience. Bobby Morgan. Bobby is the wife of Mayor Ed Morgan. So Ed served as our mayor from 1999 to 2007. Yeah. So Mayor Wayne Fulcher and his wife Nancy. Wayne served as our mayor from 2007 to 2009. Binka Schwan, wife of Mayor David Schwan. So David served as our mayor from 2009 to 2015. So David was our first directly elected mayor. He was elected by a direct vote of the people. Prior to that, all our council members were selected by the town council, appointed by the town council from amongst the ranks of the town council. Mayor Les Peterson and his wife Mary are unable to be with us, but they served, or Les served, as our mayor from 2015 to 2022, and I cannot forget my partner, Betsy Lynn. So please give them a big round of applause. So this program, as well as all the other events that are part of the 40th anniversary, came together through a committee, a 40th anniversary committee. And if you picked up on the way in a tote bag, and if you didn't get one, please pick one up. And in there is a card that talks about all the other events that we have scheduled through December 7th. And it's quite a nice program. And so we had local business leaders, some town staff, residents who helped put this all together. And so I'd like to introduce them to you. They did a tremendous amount of work for this and all the other events we have coming up. And just hold your applause. And if you're when I say your name, please stand, and that would be great. So Kim Prince of Proven Media, Shelley Spence of Images Magazine and Grace Renee Gallery, Steve Feld of the Carefree Cave Creek Chamber of Commerce, Susan Grace of Spirit in the Desert, Steve Wood of Tech for Life, Steve Propopek and Madison Garrett of the Town of Carefree staff, Diane Roth, Councilwoman-elect, Sue Bickerdike of Sue Bickerdike Interiors, Don Little of Black Mountain Coffee Shop and Grinding Gears, and the indispensable chair of the committee from the English Rose Tea Room, Joe Gimmel. And we could not have done it without Joe, so thank you all. And so the event tonight was sold out. It sold out in a matter of just a couple of days. It was just, it was great. We had no idea it would be so popular. But thanks to live streaming put together by Councilman Vince DeLisio in the back of the room, there was a watch party at venues because we're live streaming the event. So that means that you can watch it at venues. There's people at home watching now. It's great. Or you can watch it later. You go home, you can watch it a week from now. Let's go to the town website and you can click on our YouTube station. So thank you to Vince, and welcome to all those who are watching us on the live stream. So there's no better place to kick off the 40th anniversary than here at Spirit of the Desert. And that's because the Carefree International Restaurant was here 60-some years ago, 61 years ago. It was founded here in 1963. So Eric Simonson, the executive director of Spirit in the Desert, generously made the chapel available to us. And the staff here at Spirit of the Desert has graciously supplied and prepared the appetizers that we'll enjoy later. And I'm sure there's some other appetizers and desserts and so forth. So please welcome Eric Simonson.
Thank you, Mayor Crane. On behalf of our board of directors and our amazing staff, I want to welcome you to Spirit in the Desert. This is a really special place, and not only is it one of the older commercial properties here in Carefree, but now it is a special place where people from all over the country come, and just for a couple of days, they try to turn off the noise of the outside world. And these days, that's really, really important. You know, Spirit in the Desert has been here for 31 years. And it's amazing to me how many times people come by and say, I've lived here 20 years and didn't know this place existed. And so we have 26 guest rooms, we have a full service kitchen, we have multiple meeting spaces, and again, we host people from all over the country that come in here, different church groups, different organizations. We have Tai Chi groups and yoga groups and all kinds of different organizations that come here, again, just to rest and kind of turn everything off for a few days. If you're interested in any of the programs that we have going, please take there's some brochures on the way out, please do that. And I do think that Chef Carl has some great things. He did take the inspiration. He figured if it's 40 years, he wanted to get some nice 80s vintage things. So we have deviled eggs multiple ways. We have Reuben sandwiches and fondue, and it's going to be quite the setup over there. So, and Chef Carl does just a terrific job here. So again, on behalf of our entire staff, I want to welcome you. And please, if you have any questions about the property, about what we do, who we are, please find one of our staff and ask, and we'll do the best we can to let you know. Again, thank you so much for being here.
So the host of our live talk show interview portion of our program is a longtime resident and a good friend, Preston Westmoreland. So Preston enjoyed a 26-year career as one of the nation's top radio show talk hosts on KTAR right here in Phoenix. You might remember him. He interviewed over 25,000 guests, and before the night's over, it'll be 25,010. He's been inducted in the Arizona Broadcasters Hall of Fame. Preston is a recipient of the Marconi Award. The Marconi Award is radio's Oscar for Best Large Market Radio Personality in the United States. So Preston and his wife, Nancy, where are you, Nancy? There we go. Now serve our community as realtors with Russ Lyons Sotheby's. So please welcome Preston Westmoreland.
And we'll need that microphone too for our guests. I'm so appreciative you all came today. We've lived here about 45 years now, and I can tell you what I've learned is that John Travolta and Bruce Springsteen did not live on Black Mountain. I sold a house years ago, and somebody said, you know that house, Julio Iglesias lives in it. And I said, really? I said, which one? I said, that one? Oh, no, I just sold it. That's Carolyn and Peter Sturris. They make auto bumpers. So these rumors have a way of getting around, but you know, every house does have a story, and it's just amazing. Nancy introduced me to a guy named Tom Hetherington. I said, Tom, what do you do? He says, I was Del Webb's personal attorney. And I said, well, what was Del Webb like? And here's a story you've never heard before. He said, well, when Del Webb would open a hotel, he would have me call up the local car dealer. And he would say to the car dealer, how many cars do you have on the lot? Well, I got 180. I'll pay you to bring them over and park them in front of our hotel till we get business. And that's how he made his hotels look popular. It's like the restaurant nobody goes to if it's empty, right? So, but it's very, we have some wonderful people here that we're going to be talking with. When I moved here, and you have probably the same stories, there wasn't a stoplight from Bell Road all the way to Carefree. And I had hair and went to the barber then too. So, but we have a personal message I'm going to read in a few minutes from Paul Harvey Jr. Still has a house here. I don't know whether you realized he wrote the rest of the stories, those very popular books, in his dad's house. And I'll read his personal message that he sent me to read very shortly. Well, let me see. Here's the usual suspects that we have here. Let me, if I can, have the microphone go down to Nancy Glenn. This is just an amazing story. As a pilot, I flew out of Sky Ranch for 20 or 30 years. And the people who lived at Sky Ranch on the runway is a virtual who's who of American business. You had, up by Pima Road, Dieter Loper. He was the Carefree Land Company's official accountant. Next door to Dieter was Orrin Etzen. He started monkeying around with fiberglass in his hangar and invented Bayliner boats. Next to Orrin Etzen was a guy named Sam Mosier. Sam had a company called Signal Oil. Signal Oil, one time I remember he was flying into the runway when it was dirt, and it had rained, and he got dirt all over his airplane. So he called up, he made one phone call, and he paid to have the runway paved so he would never get dirt on his plane again. And then you had the U-Haul people and the heirs to Purex and the Stearns who started Deer Valley and Park City ski area. It's just amazing. And right next to them is Bob and Nancy Glenn, first residents. You were the youngest people at the airport then, weren't you?
One of the youngest,
Yeah.
yes. Thank you. Now I think we're the oldest.
Yeah. Well, this is a classic story. Their home, Sky Ranch, as you know, was the first fly-in aviation air park in America. And their home was the first home. And if you would tell that great story of who built your house and the bet they had going about who would buy it.
Okay. So we bought our home in, I think it was 1988. We lived on a ranch about half an hour south of here, about 30 acres, and we bred Rhodesian Ridgeback dogs and running quarter horses. Yeah. And my husband was a pilot. And so he started coming up here, and he found this wonderful airport. The people who lived in our home before we bought it were the most interesting couple. They were elderly. They were probably in their 80s. And they had, one afternoon, they started to take a drive. And they thought they were just going to take a drive out in the country, have fun, just look around. They had no intention of buying anything. And that was 15 years before that. And they came upon this road, and it had an open house sign, and they couldn't see any homes, they couldn't see anything. Once they drove in, they saw this one house. So they went in and they looked around and they bought it. And they didn't play golf, and on the north side was the Desert Forest Golf Club, the golf course. And on the southern side was the airport, and they didn't fly airplanes. And I just can't imagine this, because it was way out in the middle of nowhere, and they were 15 years before. They were probably in their 60s, late 60s. And they were the dearest people. Their names were Earl and Juanita Bartholomew. And so when we bought our house, my husband couldn't find anybody to sell a house. He knocked on all the doors at the airport. Finally, he thought, okay, I'll buy a hangar. So he bought a hangar, went to a hangar party, met a man who said, oh, I have a lot I can sell you. So we bought the lot. Then the house next door, the Bartholomews decided to sell their home. And 2 weeks later, we bought the house.
Now, Hugh Downs, the great broadcaster, host of the Today
Yes.
Show, longtime Carefree resident, built the house with the premier builder who's built 186 homes, Gary Jones. And I guess they had a little bit of a bet. Hugh said, it's got to be a pilot who buys because it's the runway. And Gary said, no, we have a top 100 golf course, Desert Forest. It's got to be a golfer. And the guy who bought it did neither. And I think they said, well, why would you buy a house here when you do neither? He says, look at the views.
I know.
You
The
know.
views are spectacular. They truly are. We love this house. It's really a wonderful desert house. And I brought a magazine, if anyone would like to see it, has a picture of it. The Carefree Development Company, KT Palmer and Tom Darlington, marketed our house along with the golf course and the airport as one package. And they marketed that way. I have another brochure, I can't find it, and it shows pictures of this. And they put it in magazines and sent it across the country. And this magazine is a golf magazine. It's called 72, and it shows our house. And that's the way the article is written, as a marketing project with the golf course and the airport. And anyway, that's.
Let me just ask you, as you were driving out here the first time with your father, and he knew KT, what was your impression of coming out to Carefree? Because it was all dirt cow track roads, right?
Oh, I thought he was completely nuts. I told him too. Well, my parents, we moved to Arizona in 1951, and we moved between Camelback and Mummy Mountain, and there was nothing out there, and it wasn't Paradise Valley then. There was nothing. Well, there was Camelback Inn and, you know, Franciscan Renewal Center and a little restaurant called El Chorro, and that was about it. And there were ranches, and it was absolutely glorious. So everybody who lived there, they wanted to build things down there. They wanted to build a hospital. They wanted to build a zoo. They wanted to build a country club, which was crazy. And I told them all they were crazy. So they built Paradise Valley Country Club. And KT Palmer and Tom Darlington were in on that, and they knew my dad. My dad just loved these men because the three of them were all risk takers, and they loved adventure, and they loved land. And so when Daddy heard about Carefree, he came to me because my mother was too chicken, and he said, we're going to go for a drive. And I was always very suspicious of him because you didn't go for drives then. If you ended up on a dirt road, Tatum Boulevard was a cattle track with boulders in it. And my father's car was forever in the agency being repaired because he would hit these rocks, and it was really a challenge.
Yeah.
So you didn't drive out for drives. I mean, nobody did. And if you caught anybody walking, one of two things had happened to them. They had either fallen off their horse or they ran out of gas. You always stopped to help them. It was really kind of a little bit the Wild West still. So he said, all right, now this is what we're going to do. You're going to go with me up to, I said, up to where? He said, well, it's past Shade. No, we're not going. No, yes, we are. You're going to go with me because two of my friends are starting to build a town. I thought, oh boy, I was really in for it. Scottsdale Road was all dirt, boulders and rocks. I'm not even sure that at that time it was paved to Shea Boulevard.
Yeah.
And so I said, all right, get the water bag. You didn't go anywhere without your water bag, you know, on the front of your car. Get the water bag, and we'll get lots of water, and we'll head up there. And I figured we wouldn't get back. Because I didn't know how far we were going. So we got up to Carefree, and I was a teenager, and I don't remember seeing anything. I don't remember a sundial. I don't remember the Darlington Palmer building. I don't remember anything, just little trails and roads cut out. And I know that Daddy picked out a lot over on Black Mountain and up, a little bit up high. Not very, they didn't go very high. So it was really nice.
What did you pay for the lot? I heard some of the lots were for $2,000.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It was, practically
Wasn't very
nothing.
expensive at all.
Practically nothing. And we made it back. I'm here to tell you we made it back, safe and sound. Couldn't believe it. But in reading some of KT's writings, I wanted to mention one thing. There was a man named Ben Cowles. I don't know if any of you ever knew Ben Cowles. He's deceased now. But he was president of the Desert Forest Golf Club twice. And he wrote a wonderful story celebrating their silver anniversary of the golf club. And he said that playing golf in those days was really a challenge because there was open range and so many cattle running all over the golf course, along with the javelina and the coyotes and the rattlesnakes. And then he said, if you lived down in the valley in Scottsdale, where he lived, and you came up to play golf, it was a full day, and then you started back, and you hit Scottsdale Road, which was all dirt, and you hit a lot of cattle. And he said, literally, it was like playing Russian roulette to get back to Scottsdale. And I believe it because I was there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Nancy Glenn. I hand the microphone over to Biff. This is Biff Miller. He was part of the team that incorporated the town of Carefree. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you decided on the boundaries and why was the boulders cut in half?
Well, a little background first.
Sure.
I played tennis a lot around the Carefree Inn, and that's where I met Barb and Roy and so many other people.
Yeah.
It was the gathering place for lots of us, especially if we were, young enough, although I played with Jack Snow, who worked with KT, and Perry Snow, his wife. But that was a little bit before me. You must be older than I am. But anyway, so I came here and built in 76, and then we moved in on July 4th weekend of 77. And in being at the Carefree Inn, I met quite a few people who were worried about Scottsdale coming here. And at that particular time, Scottsdale was starting to morph from the world's most western town and more high density and things. So we said, well, this isn't a good idea. But I wasn't the original people who started. I joined their team, but it was older people. And to talk about them, we'll quickly get to why we changed boundaries. We lost the election. It was really simple.
Yeah.
We took in all of Desert Mountain when we originally started. We went clear down to Lone Mountain, as I recall. And I remember Cave Creek was to our west, so we didn't invade their town. But we had large boundaries, and Scottsdale was not happy with us. And so we had an election, as I recall, and we lost. It was simple as that. So we pulled our boundaries back to where they are today. And that election, we won. And the people who I wanted to celebrate a few minutes about are some of the people that were the movers and shakers, if you will, because they were all fabulous people, kind of what you're talking about. There wasn't one person that I worked with that I didn't admire. And one couple especially, it was done at the Catholic Church. That's where we would meet, and Carolyn Bartal and John Bartal had come to me, and he was one of the original council people, but he was also one of the top minds. They were a couple that I want to talk about for just a minute to celebrate them, and there were others. But they were unusual people. He was a Philadelphia lawyer, and I didn't know what that was at the time, or what I didn't know was what a blue blood was. And I quickly learned, because Carolyn was a daughter of a steel magnate. They were out of Philadelphia. And to me, they were eccentric people. And I learned that by going to a wedding in about 1978, I think, or 77, out here at the Carefree Inn. And everybody came, it was hot, and we were all in short sleeve shirts and clothes, and John and Carolyn walked in an evening gown and a white tuxedo. And when they hit the dance floor, everybody sat down because I didn't understand how they knew how to waltz like that and dance like that. And they were all over the floor, and I remember turning to somebody and said, "Who is that?" Well, and they were great people, and that's how Carefree really got formed. It wasn't just them. It was Merritt Bigelow worked in our group. He was our first mayor.
Yeah.
Certainly so was John Bartal there. David Dennison was around quite a bit, but I was young. I was doing the math. I think I was only about 33 when we had to start incorporating, which was in 1982, as I recall, or might have, yeah, 82, I think. And I was one of the younger people, and Bartal and Merritt and some of these other guys had visions. They were much older than I was. They were in their 70s probably then, and they were wonderful people. That's why this town's a wonderful town. It goes even on to John Crane, our latest mayor. They're great people. And that's why you have a great town. And
Yeah.
all of them were. They were eccentric. And
Yeah.
a story with, after we became a town, Nan Searle was a woman, Steve and Nan Searle. Parents had a store right near yours. And Nan and I, when we were she joined too and said, well, I want to help become a town. We don't really want to become a part of Scottsdale. But Carolyn came up to me, and John's wife. She ran the show more than John did, to tell you the truth, but she's quite the lady. And I said, well, Carolyn, I've been going through the math and looking at the numbers, and it takes $2,500 under Arizona law to incorporate, and I don't think we've got the count. I've done it 3 times, and I've been pretty careful, and I'll never forget, she put her arms, one hand on each of my shoulders, and she was probably about 70 years old, maybe 75. She said, honey, you let me worry about the count. And I got the message real quickly. And then she said, we have, so the real world was Scottsdale wanted to annex Rolling Hills and Carefree Shadows, and they put petitions out. And people were signing the petitions to join them, and Carolyn came to me and again put one hand on each shoulder and said, you know what, you live in Carefree Shadows, and so does Nan. There won't be a town if those petitions are signed. We all knew our population count was really close. And so she said, you got to get out there and stop them. You know the people there, go house to house, and we did. And that's why I want to give a shout out to Nan Boyer Searle. She went door to door. They had to move to Denver because she had some illness problems and is living with her daughter. But went door to door. When there wasn't a door there, we went to the people that owned the land and talked to people, and we defeated the petitions by the skin of our teeth, but we won, and we kept our population together, and we have a town. Merritt was great too. He would go out, and he wasn't a grunt like I was. He did more of the bigger things like making sure the law was being met, and so did John Bartal, who was a lawyer. And because of all of these people, and John Naga, if people knew him, he was our second mayor. And when they appointed the town council, and then they came to us, and I was put on P&Z, and I remember Nan looking at us and said, we're the 2 token young people of P&Z, and we both laughed. But Naga did a great job of drafting, having us as a group. We drafted all the planning and zoning law. We put it together.
Yeah.
It worked.
Good job.
Yeah, between us, though, we copied 80% out of Maricopa County Code, so
Yeah.
we weren't that great. But we did do a good job, and all those people, and all of them afterwards, and I know Ed Morgan's wife is out here, and I remember when I was telling John Crane about how things were difficult. Our agendas, I was just on it, and I started chairing it, I think, in 87 or 86, I don't know, but Harvey Toffin, whose name is on front of the Catholic Church, is building the Our Lady of Joy. If you look on the plaque going in, it mentions Harvey Toffin funded the whole thing. He's a great man. He headed P&Z, and he mentored me. And he said, I want you to take my place. They want me on to council. And I go, well, I don't know. I'm pretty young. But I had a man come in, and he said, well, I know all these guys, and I was a lawyer in Illinois. And they want me on P&Z, and I said, well, could you be the vice chair? They are insisting that I be the chair. And he said, sure. So one day, and probably about 1986, and I'm telling you, it was a land rush to see who could develop the land in Carefree. We'd have 20-some things on an agenda for a small town. Everybody wanted to build here, and it was like, how are we going to stop this? And the older men and women, like Peggy Dennison and Sue Bigelow, were great because they would pay more attention to we who were younger, and they come over and say, you guys can handle this. Just nobody's going to push you over. Just stand tough. And we did. And I had Phil Jones, who lived in the Boulders, sitting to my right. That's why I'd rather tell stories for a minute. And I had the Attorney General for the state of Arizona came in, and he walked up to the front, and he said, well, you know, I'm the Attorney General for the state of Arizona. And I said, yeah, I know who you are. And he said, you have me as number 18 on the agenda, and I'm a very busy man, and I need to be moved up. And so I thought to myself, uh-oh, I better move him up. And Phil Jones leans over, covers the microphone, and we probably had 80 or 100 people out there that were waiting to see what we were going to do. Covers my microphone and says, Beth, do you want me to handle this? And I said, yeah, Phil, I do. And he takes the microphone and he goes, Mr. Attorney General, you will sit down and you will wait your turn. Like everybody else. And I remember leaning back in my chair and going, oh, I wasn't going to do that, but I sure am glad that he did. And that's my time, probably up.
Thank you, Biff.
You had great people out there. We've had, Ed Morgan was a great mayor. They wanted to put a 50,000 kilowatt line, and it was going over rolling hills to service Desert Mountain. And it went right through Carefree Shadows and over rolling hills. And I remember going to Isnaga, the second mayor, and I said, they can't do that. You can't put utility lines over our houses there. You're going to ruin Carefree and what we're to do. So we went down to see Herb Drinkwater, who I'd happened to meet the New Year's Eve before and sat and drank with him for 3 hours at a New Year's Eve party up on what is now Legend Trails at a home up there. And so I knew Herb, and we went in, and John said, I'm going to go with you. I agree with you. We can't have 50,000 kilowatt lines. It's going to have to do with Ed Morgan in a minute. And so we went down, and I said to Herb, I said, you know, we sat and drank for about 4 hours, and we got along really well, but I'm really upset. You guys can't put a 50,000 kilowatt line across Rolling Hills and Carefree Shadows. And he said, I brought his P&Zs and his consoles drawings with me. And he said, yeah, I've heard about it. And you know what, Beth? You're right. That was a great man, too. And Isnaga, thank God he was there. And there were no lines. But after that, I learned my lesson living in Carefree Shadows. I said, I will make sure there's somebody either on console, running P&Z, or the mayor of this town, sitting in Carefree Shadows or Rolling Hills. And I had the help of a great lawyer in Rolling Hills, and his daughter had become friends of ours. And so when we had Sherry Root before Ed got there. She went on to Consul. We have Bob Asher, who ran P&Z after I did in the early 90s. And then Ed came along, and I said, Ed, you need to do this. We need to protect our area. And they were all great people. And that's why we have a great town. Thank you.
Hand that over to Barbara there. Before we get to Barbara, she has got a great story. Your father used to manage the Spanish Village, right?
Yes, my father, when Dr. John Levy from Milwaukee, who was a plastic surgeon and a rockhound, that my parents knew through John Dale Owen, who had Sierra Vista Guest Ranch in Cave Creek, and they were all rockhounds. Yeah. And Don came out here to visit the Owens and fell in love with the whole area. And I know he had a condo here or something in Carefree, but in May of 1972, he purchased Spanish Village from KT and Rex Howard, and immediately turned to my father and said, I want you to move from Milwaukee, where we were living at the time, out here to Carefree and manage Spanish Village for us. So we came out here, or they came out here. My parents moved here in '72. I was in graduate school, so I wasn't here at the time. But we had been coming out to the area since 1963, visiting the Owens and the ranch, and knew the area. I remember eating at the International Restaurant.
Yeah, and that's Barbara Van Der
Oh,
Rees,
yeah.
by the way. What was the restaurant like? Because can you imagine being a chef at a restaurant that has to prepare 6 different ethnic and nationality foods? And I don't know if there's enough even Nordic foods to fill a cookbook.
I don't really remember the menu. You got to remember, I was in high school then, you know. But I remember just being amazed because each room, it was the way it was decorated for all of the different areas of the country. Martha probably remembers it too. And I remember that whatever I ate, whichever room we ate in, which I don't recall, unfortunately, was very good, but you know, high school, you don't remember food that well. But I remember being very impressed by the whole setup of the place.
African, Nordic, North American, South American, Mediterranean, Asian, just
I can't remember.
And
them all, but
nobody's
it was
ever tried to duplicate that again, maybe because they had to shut down in 2 years. It was too much, perhaps, for the
too
people
much,
out
I
here,
think.
you know.
If they would have maybe cut back to 3 rooms or something,
Yeah,
it might have lasted longer. And there wasn't that many people up here, you got to remember,
Sure.
in those days either. So, but my parents moved out here. After a year of my father managing Spanish Village, they had one location in the village they couldn't lease because it was kind of on the end, down on the, nobody wanted to put a store in there. So they decided to put their own store in there. And since my dad was a rock hound, he had a huge rock collection, which a lot of it he'd gotten in Arizona, hauled back to Wisconsin every year when they were visiting, you know, every year for those 10 years when we used to visit. And then they had to move it all back to Arizona. So they started the rock shop with my father's collection. And he managed it till 1977 when he retired. And unfortunately, a month later, passed away. But I remember so many of the early people in Spanish Village, the leather shop, for example. The guys in the leather shop, Conrad, was having so much trouble, you know, finding a place to live and not making much money. And my father said, I'm going to just kind of turn away. And so if you put a little cotton there and sleep there in the evenings, I won't tell anyone else. Because he couldn't afford to do anything else, and he was working all the time. So he got along pretty well with almost all of the businesses that were there at the time, and worked very hard to bring it. Their first cat, he found a kitten one day in Spanish Village and brought it home, and that was the first cat my parents had. Of course, I don't know how many of you know, but the location of the Keeler's restaurant right now was initially El Toro Restaurant was the first name, and Spanish food, of course, Mexican Spanish food, and it had this huge bull head in the bar area, and I'm talking huge. Yeah. And you know, if somebody was kind of looking at it close behind the bar, the guy could press a button or pull something, I forget what, and it would lunge out at you. And they loved it. You know, people who'd been there before then would always bring their friends and say, go look at that head over there. so they could become victims as well. And it stayed there until it got so ratty they literally had to take it down. But that was many, many years later. And of course, the restaurant itself, the property, is haunted.
They say it is?
It's haunted.
Who would it be haunted by?
Well, I'm pretty sure it was Tom Darlington who would be haunting it since he died in the restaurant.
Yeah.
The press reports and everything listed is a heart attack.
Was the food that bad?
Well,
Yeah, that's not a good advertisement for your
no,
restaurant.
it isn't. But, well, my father told me he didn't die of a heart attack. He actually choked.
Oh.
And that's what killed him. Of course, maybe it was a heart attack related to it.
Yeah.
But they didn't want, you know, you just open a new restaurant and you're trying to attract people to this new shopping area in Carefree in this restaurant. You don't have somebody choking to death, especially one of the founders of Carefree. So therefore, it was kind of written off as a heart attack, is my understanding. Anyway, he's there. And I hadn't experienced myself, but Jo told me that she had.
Yeah.
And I talked to some of the people at the Keelers now, and they said, oh, yes. We can work late in the evening, and when I'm closing up at night, I'll turn off the music and finish my stuff. And all of a sudden, 20 minutes later, the music will start up again and stuff. And shot glasses fall off the things and things moving around. She would like to know, actually, she told me, Sonny over there, what did KT drink? because I'd like to just leave a shot of it out for him, and maybe he won't disturb us so much then and everything. Anyway, Spanish Village itself opened, the North Courtyard area, where Keeler's is and our store, opened in 1968. And then they built the other one across the way, the South Courtyard, which opened in like 69, 70 in that area. And the big patio there now that Black Mountain Coffee Shop uses, that whole interior area used to be a little creek with a waterfall that would recirculate in there.
Yeah.
It was all desert and stuff in this little creek. It was fascinating. Anything else? And of course, all the shops in Spanish Village at that time, in your lease, it told you what you could sell. So you couldn't just rent a spot and put in a shop and sell whatever you wanted. You had a list of various things that you could be. Like if you were an Indian jewelry store, that's the area that you could be. We could sell rocks, but we couldn't sell diamonds or things like that, you know. So it was restricted, and they were very fussy about it, very fussy about it. So.
Very good. It's going to be hard to top the Tom Tarling story. Barbara Vanderleest.
Thank you.
Well, when Paul Harvey used to come to his house here, he would call Gary Jones. They were hiking buddies. And he would say, Gary, I'm going to be out there in 3 weeks. Let's plan 3 10 to 15-mile hikes. And he would just love the desert, would love to come out here. And his son now, Paul Orant, who is a world-renowned classical pianist and also the author of the rest of the stories, still lives in the house occasionally. And he sent me this note to read to you. He says, Preston. It's the wrong note. Delightful hearing from you. All the best for the big doings. I will not be in the desert at this time, but please convey my regards to all the celebrants. Matter of fact, my dad and his personal engineer and longtime friend Robert Benninghoff broadcast to the entire world in the 60s and the 70s from the garage, it's over here on Carefree Drive, in the Harvey's Carefree home. Dad and Bob had converted the garage into a rustic broadcast studio. I don't know if that's a zoning violation, but I think we'd look past that.
We'll check into it.
Yeah, we'll check into that right away. The shows went to Phoenix by telephone line, then off to New York, and eventually all the way to 1,000 affiliates in those days. Eventually, of course, Paul Harvey News and Comment became the very first request for a terrestrial broadcast from the astronauts of the International Space Station. It's a wonderful community and growing more awesome every day. My kudos, Paul Harvey Jr. Years ago, my wife and I did a desert survival video called Stay Alive, A Guide to Survival in the Southwest Deserts. We did it all in Carefree, and K.T. Palmer was such a stickler. He didn't want any of the plants destroyed, and he wanted to keep as much of the vegetation. In fact, one time Troy Hayden, who now is at Channel 12, called me and he said, Preston, I want to do a program on desert survival. He came out to our house on Dream Street. We did the whole program on the lot next door, just on the desert. It looked like you're in the middle of nowhere. So Paul Harvey loved our program, and he would occasionally on his national broadcast give me a desert survival tip. And this is one of them. I was sitting there one day, and I always played Paul Harvey News at 12:15 on KTAR, and this came on one day.
Preston, Westmoreland, KTAR. Add this to your next documentary on desert survival. Take along a tube of Elmer's glue. And should a bunch of teensy tiny, almost invisible little cactus needles attach themselves to you, smear the area with Elmer's glue. And within minutes, you can peel off the dried glue and the stinging spines. You're welcome.
I don't know if that's authorized or not to use that. Don't call me if you get stuck with Elmer's glue. Well, Barbara, hand that mic over to the likable Roy Hunt. Roy is a contractor, but is well known as an actor, a thespian. He's in one of the most famous commercials ever done by J.P. Wentworth. If you Google later, go home and Google J.P. Wentworth, the opera bus. And there's a couple of different ones in there, but it's when you watch it, you'll never forget their phone number because they say it a million times. Yeah. That was a great one. Roy, tell us what life was like in the early days here in Carefree.
All right, I will. But first, a little departure there. Yes, I was singing opera on a bus for J.G. Wentworth, like you do. That was several years ago. I am here to really give you some more kind of color commentary, and clearly that color is red. Here. I had to go to the dermatologist a couple days ago, so now I'm scaring children for a few days. So I have many connections with this area from so many different angles. It's kind of hard to remember them all, so I made notes. My family actually moved out here in the 60s from Tempe. My father, W.D. Hunt, was a builder out here, and he spent his life in commercial construction, always wanted to do residential construction, so he went ahead and got his contractor's license, and we moved out here. My parents bought property up on Horizon and Stevens Roads up here in Carefree. And my parents purchased 40 acres from a man named Jack Cox, who had been out here since like the 40s. He was an Englishman who was a map maker, cartographer, and been all over the world, and then settled in this area out here. And then my parents did a subdivision in that 40 acres, and that's how my father started, was building a couple of spec homes on that 40 acres. And my mother was an English teacher at Saguaro High School in Scottsdale. So we had moved out here, and it was 68, I guess. I had just graduated the 8th grade in Tempe, and I was getting ready to start high school. We came out here, and all us rural kids, it was so rural out here. There was no high school out here in 1968. It was K through 8, and then you had to fend for yourself after that. And since we weren't in anybody's school district, you could go to any high school you could get to. So if you had access to a car, there were kids out here that went to Moon Valley High School on 35th Avenue and Cactus. Now, granted, this is back in the Middle Ages. You could drive there a little faster than you could now. But since my mother taught at Saguaro High School, it was kind of a no-brainer for me. They had buses picking up all us rural kids out here in this area and hauling them down to Paradise Valley High School at 40th Street and Bell. That was the closest high school. And everyone I talked to said, man, if you don't have to do it, don't. I mean, it's an hour plus every morning, waiting for the bus, getting to school, and then doing it in reverse every day. Well, all I had to do was walk out the door and get in the car and drive to Saguaro High School with my mother. So it's 23 miles, and you could do it in 25 minutes. Because you could head down Scottsdale Road, and you didn't have to take your foot off the gas for a long time. So 65 miles an hour down Scottsdale Road. Even Bell Road back then in the 60s and early 70s, it was a two-way stop east and west. It was a throughway north and south. So the first traffic light you actually came to was Shea Boulevard back then. And if that light was green, you still could have your foot to the floor. And yeah, we were at Saguaro High School down on McDonald and Hayden in 25 minutes there. So that it was obviously you could pull it off. You couldn't do it today, but that was the choice we made. But it was very different. They had a cattle guard where Carefree Highway and Tom Darlington meet. There was a cattle guard across Tom Darlington there because the area south of there was still open range. There was cows roaming around everywhere that would frequently cross Scottsdale Road, and not being the smartest animals in the animal kingdom would get hit by cars. And there was quite often a bloated cow laying on the side of the road that had been tagged by a pickup truck or something. So they had the cattle guard there mostly to keep the cattle from wandering up into Carefree, into the new development of Carefree, because they did have to chase them off the Boulders golf course. I know at times they would get in there and go, this looks like a nice place. Let's eat some of the grass in here. So eventually that disappeared. They got rid of the cattle guard and all that stuff. But back in those days before they built all the low water crossings too on Scottsdale Road, you know, all the washes that were running across there. Some of them were pretty big washes that ran pretty deep. And there was one evening where there was several kids out here that went to Saguaro High School. There was a whole caravan of us that drove down Scottsdale Road to get in there. And one evening, we had one of the big rainstorms out here, and the washes were running full, and we couldn't get home, any of us. We got out to some of these washes, and we couldn't cross. So we turned around and we drove back to Saguaro High School, and we ended up having to spend the evening with the vice principal at Saguaro High School in the gymnasium while we all sat around waiting for the washes to go down so we could go home. And it was such a traumatic experience for him that forever after that, if a few clouds came up in the sky out to the north here, they came on the intercom at Saguaro High School and said, "All you kids that live out in Cave Creek and Carefree, get out of here now." You know. And there was like 3,000 students in Saguaro High School, so about 1,500 of them headed to the parking lot. "Yeah, I live in Cave Creek and Carefree. We can go home? Good." So, yeah, they didn't let that happen ever again. So our connections out here are many. My wife, Debbie, who's sitting right here, I met when I was in high school. She actually had my mother for a teacher. Yeah. My mother was a humanities and English teacher at Saguaro High School, and she used to brag to people because we got engaged when she was a senior in high school. I know, scandalous, right? And she used to brag to people that she got to pick her own daughter-in-law out personally from the best ones that she had in her class there. Not true. I did the picking there. But anyway, yeah, Debbie was first Desert Foothills Junior Miss out here when they decided to have the Junior Miss program in like 1974, 3, or something like that. Yeah. And we had a lot of connections from different ways out here. Debbie's father, Don Dickinson, had a real estate company, and they moved out here from Pennsylvania in 71. And he had Dickinson Company, real estate, and then he also at one point moved over into the old building where the Carefree Town offices are now, was Sundial Realty, and that was Debbie's father, Don Dickinson. That was his company. And eventually they were bought by Russ Lyon. He had a very successful business there. Russ Lyon wanted his business, and so he sold this business to Russ Lyon, and then Debbie's younger brother eventually became president of Russ Lyon Sotheby's. Again, yeah, so go figure it here, nepotism. Anyway, Debbie and I graduated from the University of Arizona in '78. We moved out here, and one of the other founding men that made Carefree happen was Les Ruert. And Les Ruert had a 40-acre ranch out here on Windmill Road, south of Stagecoach and on the east side of Windmill. And he had a 40-acre ranch, and we lived in his guest house for a couple of years, from 78 to 80, while we were building our first house. We live over on Scopa Trail, and we built our house. We completed it in 1980 and moved in. But there was a lot of things different about this area back then. When we were kids growing up out here, the local school in Cave Creek, there was no grass anywhere to play on. There was not a park. There was not a grass field at the school. So what we used to do was we would go over to that lovely Desert Forest Golf Club of which you've heard about, and we would drive clear up to the northeast end of it up there on Pima Road, and we'd park the car, and there was a bunch of us who played soccer and football and stuff. And then we'd stand out there, and we would look down this one fairway on this par 5, and we'd look and we'd think, late in the day, and we'd think, okay, this is the last golfers coming through. I think they're the last foursome. And then as soon as they would make a turn, and we're standing there going, and then we'd run out there and we'd start playing real quick out there on the fairway. Until the greenskeeper got word that we were out there, and we'd see him come screaming out on a golf cart, yelling, "Hey, you kids, get out of here. I keep telling you, don't come back here." We won't. And then we'd come back a few days later. Yeah, so there was a lot of things that were very different out here, how rural it was. There's still some cool things about this area a lot of people don't know about. There's some property right south of Sky Ranch, across Cave Creek Road, on the south side of Cave Creek Road, that's still undeveloped. There's some areas in there where you can still see wagon tracks from the cavalry wagons that went back and forth between Fort McDowell on the Verde and Fort Whipple up in Prescott. You can still see them if you know where to look in the right place, and you can see where the wagon tracks are still visible. And of course, they came through Cave Creek. They'd leave the Verde River. They'd come up here. That was their next best water stop, was Cave Creek, and they'd camp in the cave up there and then head on up towards Prescott. So there's a lot of things like that, little bits of history out here that a lot of people, I think, aren't really aware that they still exist out here. I don't know. I can't think of many. Trying to think of some of the other fun things that happen. Oh, I'll tell you some fun things. Yeah, Sky Ranch, the airport. I think the reason they did that was because we still had a couple of working dude ranches out here at the time that Carefree started. They still had Sierra Vista Guest Ranch, and they had Rancho Manana. Even further back, they had Spur Cross Guest Ranch way up the creek, and they had dirt airstrips for people to be able to fly in a small plane. And I think that KT and Tom Darling probably went, ooh, that's a good idea. People could fly in and out of here, because the drive was
horrendous.
The drive was pretty horrendous. So that was a pretty cool idea, but it's an uncontrolled airport. So here's another little connection Debbie's family has with it. Her father was a flyer, and he had a Cessna 210 at that airport, and it got stolen. Because there isn't anybody, there's no tower, there's nobody watching over your stuff. And before they built all those hangars, the planes were sitting outside. So his plane disappeared, and he put in a report with the insurance company, and a few days later, he got a call saying that they had his airplane. And a couple of off-duty sheriff's deputies had their shotguns and their dogs down in Southern California, and they were quail hunting, and they saw a plane come in out in the desert where they were, and it made a very rough landing and hit the nose gear and crow hopped a couple of times, and they thought, oh my God, hope nobody's hurt. So they come running over there to see if everybody's all right, and of course, the guys in this airplane see two guys with dogs and shotguns running over, and they got the hell out of there. They took off, and these guys got over there. Oh, why are they running? Well, that's because the plane was loaded to the gills with marijuana. And these guys, would fly low level. They'd fly at night. Preston, to try and avoid. Yeah. You don't think Preston made all his money in radio, do you?
Roy, did you know that there is still right now in the middle of the runway, there's a camera that's a night vision camera aimed up to photograph any unauthorized plane that comes in, because it's very tightly controlled. If they come in, they'll get the plane numbers, if there are plane numbers on it, and it's still operating all the time.
Yeah, but not back then. Yeah, so it was very.
That's not another good advertisement for Sky Ranch either.
It was very popular with drug runners. There were some people out here who will go unnamed who ostensibly had businesses or jobs that wasn't how they were making their money. Yeah. It was different, yeah. So that was an uncontrolled, very uncontrolled airport. When I wanted to call back to the time too that they were filming some of the movies out here, and they filmed Zabriskie Point up here. Actually, the two different movies, Zabriskie Point and Cancel My Reservation, two different movies that were filmed out here at different times. Both of them featured the Hovgard House up here on Black Mountain that Carl Hovgard had built originally. And when they did Zabriskie Point, when they did that movie, they built a replica of it where the Summit Shopping Center is now. That originally was Graham Studios, movie studios. That's where that was built. And behind there, on those boulders, behind where the Summit is now, is where they built that replica and blew it up as part of the movie. And it left huge, big black scars and stuff. And the people out here in this area were outraged at all the soot and black on these boulders, and they made the movie people, they were just going to leave it, and move on, go on their way. They made them come in and sandblast all of it off and clean all of that before they went skating out of town after making their movie.
Roy, on that, let me talk to Ron, because he has in his hand, what do you have, Ron? The original, this is pretty valuable, the original screenplay to Cancel My Reservations that starred Bob Hope that was filmed at the Boulder Rain house, Rusty Lyon's house.
There we
And
go.
a few people, if you've ever gone over to Pizza Pharaoh's and tanked up on some of the pizza, you may not realize that you were on the grounds nearby of the original Chevron gas station. And Ron Weiss, who's a realtor with Russ Lyon, you worked at the gas station, and these are the guys who get all the stories and celebrities coming in. What did you see when you were there?
Well, my background, at the time, I was just a teenager. I was living in Wisconsin, and my sister in 1976, her and her husband bought the motel in Cave Creek. It was called Desert Forest Motel back then. And the next year I graduated from high school and decided to go to Arizona State University. And I was night manager at the motel during the week. In the morning, I had my first class at ASU in Tempe at 7 a.m. I'd commute down there. And I realized that's a lot of gas I'm burning up, and I needed another job. So my sister says, hey, I know this guy in Carefree by the name of Walt Aberg, and he runs Carefree Chevron. And I met Walt and interviewed with him, and he paid me on Saturdays and Sundays $2.20 an hour. And I was a gas jockey. I was the person that people came in, I'd wash the windows, I'd check the oil, I'd put the fuel in, I'd check the air pressure in the tires, and if they had a flat tire, I'd fix the flats for them. So
What was the price of gas there? Make us feel better.
we were one of the higher priced gas stations in this area, 65 cents a gallon. I remember.
Really?
Yeah, at the time. It was 1977. Yeah. So that was premium. I think it was like 50 cents or so for regular.
Yeah.
But that station, I know it was there in 1971 because Cancel My Reservation was partially filmed inside that gas station. And if you go back and watch that movie, it's a Bob Hope movie with Eva Marie Saint, Chief Dan George, if anyone remembers him. But in one of the scenes, when you go back and look at that movie, the person who played Walt wore Walt's uniform, so it had the name Walt on it. And in the scene, Walt gets hit over the head and knocked out. This is a night scene. And then you see Chief Dan George walking through, looking for Walt because all the lights went out in the station. He goes, Walter, Walter. And every time I go back and look at that movie, I always think of Walt Aberg. Wonderful man, great personality. I happened to find a picture of him and his wife, Martha. Wonderful people.
You ever get Bob Hope come through there?
Bob, that was in 1971, so that was before my time, but Bob Hope was in that station, so a lot of that was filmed there. They also filmed up in Boulder Rain House. And then one of the gentlemen I met up there, a lot of celebrities were coming through Carefree at that time, so as I'm pumping gas on the weekends, people like Dick Van Dyke, Paul Harvey, Hugh Downs would come in. One time when Dick Van Dyke came in, he drove the 78 Chevy Silverado. I still remember it was gold with a white panel down the side. And he's wearing sunglasses. His hands are all bandaged. And I go, Mr. Van Dyke, I go, what happened to you? He goes, you're not going to believe this. He says, I don't even want to tell you what I did, but he says, I really am a naturally born klutz. And he proceeds to get out of the truck and closes the door, and he starts walking to get himself a soda, but his foot gets caught under the bell cord. In those driveways, bell cords that we drive over and the bell rings. And I grabbed him, and he goes, thank you. He goes, see what I mean? I really am a naturally born klutz. And then I proceeded, that's me here. I know you probably can't see this picture, but he's got his hands in his pocket because it's bandaged, and he's got his sunglasses on. But I got to know him and his wife, Margie, his daughters, Stacy, and Carrie. And so they'd come in regular. And I wasn't sure I was going to say this or not, but Mr. Van Dyke gave me a rough time every once in a while because he'd always come in and he'd always recount our first meeting. And our very first meeting, while I was going to college at ASU, I just loved going up to Spurcross, where Jewel of the Creek is, and I would just sit under those big trees and I would study there along the creek, and I'd just spend my afternoon studying. I just fell in love with that area. And it was a big flood. I remember the wash was running one time and it washed out the fence just to the west of there. And I decided, me and my nephew, we were gonna go walking down that creek, and we're climbing along the side of the mountain trying to stay away from the water. All of a sudden I hear a click of a gun. And it's Mr. Van Dyke, and he's got a shotgun, and he's holding it on to me and my nephew. So he made us turn around, and we apologized, but I got to see him at the service station, and he'd always give me a little bit of a rough time about that. But
How did he hurt his hand?
he never would tell me. He just said, I'm a naturally
Did
born
he fall
closet.
in a you have a picture of him falling on a cactus also.
Well, this is actually this is a photograph of when he signed for me.
Oh.
But I think this might have been a publicity photo from when he was filming his other show here, the new Dick Van Dyke Show.
Yeah.
But he signed that book for me, and this is a page from that book. The book was called TV 73. Another character that came in, Mr. Paul Harvey, busy Sunday, and this is the time when the gas shortages were happening, and we had cars on a Sunday all the way out to town Darlington, and I just was myself and one other gentleman was helping me, and we were waiting on the cars, trying to pass them through, and finally I get up to the one car, and here it is, it's Paul Harvey, and he's sound asleep behind the steering wheel. And but I grabbed one of my, I saw it, I didn't realize it was him at first, but on his credit card, his Chevron card, it said Paul Harvey. And I grabbed one of our credit card receipts, and this is just a copy of it, but he just signed for me, "Good news, Ron, Paul Harvey," you know, so. But great times, you know.
Thank you, Ron, thank you. I did want to acknowledge Ron Weiss. Our special guest is K.T. Palmer's daughter, Ruth Palmer, who's with us today. And we have KT's grandson, John West, as well. Thank you very much, John. I think, John, did you tell me that actually in the movie Zabriskie Point, K.T. Palmer had a cameo in that?
Yeah.
Or how long, what did he play?
He played a real estate agent.
Played a real estate agent. Oh boy, watch out for them. You know.
He represented the bad.
Bad element of society that was
well,
featured in the movie.
Per the hippies, he was the representative of evil.
He was the representative of evil in the movie. Okay, K.T. Palmer with a walk-on on that. Very interesting. Well, let me get the microphone over to Martha here, Martha Arnold. You're on, and Martha you were the first town nurse, were you not? And I heard Dr. Chapman in one of the first medical offices.
We had one before that.
Before that one. Well,
Yes.
Which one was the one where they had horses tied up? Was that Dr. Chapman? He had a place for your horses?
Well, I had 2 doctors with horses.
Okay, hold the mic up a little bit. 2 doctors with horses?
Yeah, 2 doctors with horses.
Did it scare the
But
patients
the
when
first one,
Yeah.
the first one did take his horse to the clinic.
Oh, okay.
But Marty would come on the horseback on the weekends.
Yeah.
That was just weekends.
Uh-huh. Now, Martha would take around some of the most infamous and famous clients in Carefree to look at property. I don't know whether we can tell
Well-
this about Joe Colombo.
No.
You cannot tell that story. I sold the house that he bought, and I remember the story was that he had a design where you couldn't see inside the house from the road. So,
But he could see out.
yeah, he could see, he couldn't get shot. You know, he died of natural causes, by the way. Martha, how did you meet K.T. Palmer? Martha was K.T. Palmer's later in life traveling companion. traveled the world with KT.
Well, yeah, we did
How
pretty
did you
good.
meet
We did a
KT?
pretty good job. But let me say one thing before I start talking about KT. That kid over there was taking my son with him over there illegally to play golf.
Oh, really?
He talked about sneaking in on that
Yeah.
golf course. He did it.
Yeah.
I could tell more stories too. Right? Okay.
So how'd you meet KT?
Church.
In church.
Yes, and we always talk about KT. Do you know there was another half there?
Betty.
Her name was Betty, and let me tell you, she was a great person.
What was she like?
Fun. Well, look at where KT, and here's family here, you know all this better than I do, but I look at the history, and I look at the time that your dad bought the property down the road where there were no roads and moved you and the family out there in the middle of nowhere. And your mother told me about how you lived in sleeping bags. And I always say, Betty and the kids never get talked about. It was always KT that we hear about. But this is one of the family, and she could probably tell us some really good stories about her
If I could
dad.
interrupt real politely, Martha's talking about 640 acres that KT got under the Homestead Act in 1933. He had a property with 4 miles of wire around it. Where Estancia is today was all part of his ranch. And he raised his family, lived 26 years out in the desert, hacked a road from Pinnacle Peak by himself all the way up so he could drive his Packard car to where this ranch was. And we happen to have listed the last 5 acres of it, which borders the lake of Estancia's golf course. It's unbelievable, and he knew land. And that's one of the reasons Ruth was telling me that he wanted to come out to Carefree, because he bought the goat ranch, but it had water. It had a lot of good water here. But Betty used to go up and bathe in the rock boulders when the depressions that filled with water. One time maybe she did it because the rocks were so sharp. And then she said, "You got to dig a well." I'm not doing that again. Dig a well, right?
Anyway,
Yeah.
the family, and you may have been part of it. I know Betty was. When your dad could no longer travel alone, which he loved to do, as we know, you decided he needed a companion because he got lost in Spain, wasn't it, or someplace. And I know Betty said, "We'll never do that again." But I was one of several ladies in the community that the family picked to go with KT on his trips. And the first one that I went with him, and I knew them through church, and a great admirer of Betty, because I stop and think about KT, how he drug you all around the country accumulating property and doing different things. You kids were exposed to all kinds of things, and we never talk about it. All we talk about is Carefree, and there was so much more to your whole family. Anyway, so your mom and your sisters, I was told, said Martha Brecker can take Dad on the next trip so he doesn't get lost. And they approached me, and I said, well, if I can get somebody to take care of the kids, I'd be glad to go. I went to South America with KT, and it was a trip. We were on a ship, and we got in a storm. I think KT and I were about the only ones on the whole ship that didn't get seasick, because when we got to the dining room that night, it was very lonely. And then several years later, he decided, in the meantime, I had lived in Las Vegas and knew my way around Vegas, and he liked to gamble. And I think it was Betty said, if you're going up to Vegas, Martha, go with you. So I made that trip with him. And then he decided he wanted to go to Australia. Now, on that first trip, I learned something very quickly. He had a certain card game he liked to play. Now, I'd never heard of it, but I thought, yeah, okay. He made all the rules, and I swore he cheated, but I didn't really. I really didn't accuse him of it. I just went with him, but I never won a game. And with the second trip, in the meantime, I had canvassed the bookstores, and I found a game book that had his card game in it. So when he asked me about going to Australia, I just bought that little book and had it with me. And I want you to know that he had the cards out ready to play before we took off from Sky Harbor. And he was out there shuffling those cards, and I got that book out, and I put it down, and I said, KT, if it's not in that book, you can't do it. Anyway, we had fun. So we landed in Australia, and he was exhausted. That's a long, hard trip. And KT had had a stroke. He was no longer a young man. I put him to bed the first thing, and when we landed, after we landed and checked into a hotel. And he was very upset with me because I went down and had dinner in the dining room, and I thought, you know, he's not in good shape. I'm going to have dinner sent up to him, because I did get him in bed to rest. Anyway, I never tried that one again. And then we went south from Australia, and we ended up at a little island over in the South Pacific. And on Sunday, there were no plans. And we decided I would rent a car. KT had to check me out first to make certain I knew how to shift, because it was a shift on the floor. KT, I'm a farm kid. I know how to do that. So we took a day around the island. In the meantime, we were heading for, I forget which island it was, but they took us out to a dairy farm, fancy, this was New Zealand, a dairy farm. Beautiful place. Well, here we got two Illinois farm kids. We aren't interested in cows and milk. And we were standing at the back of a large auditorium, and there were probably 45, 50 people in there that were present for the presentation. And at the end of the presentation, they brought out a milk cow and had a challenge of who would come up and milk the cow. Nobody would go up and milk the cow. And I looked at KT and I said, would I embarrass you if I went up there and milked that cow? And he said, no. So I went up and milked the cow. Later that evening, as we are having drinks at the bar at the motel where we were staying at, all at once we each had 3 free drinks. Come to find out, people were so impressed with my milking job, we got free drinks, and KT looked at me and said, you got any more hidden talents I don't know about? he used to pull that one on me every once in a while. I'd do something and he'd wonder about it. So it was a great opportunity to know a man who, he never complained to me. He never fussed about anything. He was an excellent traveler. And I had the privilege of sharing with him.
Very good. Thank you, Martha Arnold. Martha's book, For Land's Sake. How many people have a hard copy of this book? It's one of the rare ones. If you go online and look for a paperback copy, it might cost you $300 to $400. And if you have the original with a dust jacket, it's worth quite a bit of money.
You might be able to rent it at the library.
You can rent it at the library. This tells the whole story of his ranch and the entire formation of Carefree. Did want to get to Patty Schiano. Patty, do you have can I ask you for a couple stories? Do you have any stories at all? We kind of wind up here.
Okay, I'll make it as fast
Oh,
as I
don't worry
could.
about it. Don't worry. Take your
Should I
time.
stand up or what?
No, sit down. I think you have to go that way
Yeah.
away from the speaker. Let me help you on
Get a little bit of, I'll mute mine.
Yes. I'm going to have to sit here. Can she sit here?
I spread out.
I heard about you a long time ago. I'll talk to you later. I'm Patty Schiano. Is it working?
Why don't you use mine here?
Hi, I'm Patty Schiano. I live in the Carefree Estates for 30-some odd years. I've known you for ages.
You hold a little bit closer, yeah. There you go.
Okay, I'm not used to this. But
Don't worry about it.
Bear with me. I'm living at the Carefree Estates, which was formerly the Carefree Inn Estates.
Yeah.
And am I doing okay?
Sure, oh yeah.
And
Here, I'll hold the microphone for you while you, there you go. Go ahead.
Okay. So what I did was put down a few of the ideas that I wanted to share with you, and I'll attempt to do that. Keep in mind, I'm 90 years old, and to say, it's hard to keep your,
I said, I've got a year.
a year? Well, anyway, I will, good evening to you all. I'm Patty Schiano, and I live at the Carefree Estates for 34 years. And to me, I call it the jewel of Carefree because it is a beautiful little community of 33 homes. And I was able to, and I bet you'll remember this name, Dot Agner.
Oh, heavens, yes.
Yeah, well, Don was working for Russ Lyon.
Uh-huh.
And I came from Saddle River, New Jersey to check out what Carefree was all about. And when I came out here in 1989, I stayed at the Boulders. And during that time, I met Don Agner, who was affiliated with Russ Lyon. Oh, is that better? At any rate, I met Dot, and I was walking through the Boulders, and she said, "Hey, Patty, do you know anything about the Carefree Estates?" And I said, "No." She said, "The McWhorter house is up for sale, and it will be a real treat if you came over to take a look at it," which I did. I stepped a foot into that home, and I knew it was going to be my home forever, and it has been. I love Carefree, and I love the estates most of all. But I will tell you a story about, let me think what I was going to tell you.
Well, Patty, let me just ask you.
Why don't you ask
The
me?
story I heard was when the Carefree Inn opened, it was the big gathering place for everybody, and a lot of the folks came and stayed all winter in rooms there. And they had asked the management of the Carefree Inn, we'd really like to get a little more room if we're staying here all winter. And they decided to build the Carefree Estates on the resort property they own, and it's
Yes.
still owned resort today.
Well, the interesting part is I found out from the Foussards. The Foussards were people who actually had the builder. It was the building was made by the Japanese architect. It was all in place. Henry Foussard from Minnesota came to there to manage it, and with his family, and they developed it into the Carefree Inn Estates.
And he was the one who had the tennis court there. He had a
That's
little
right.
extra land right by the old opera house.
That's exactly right. Yeah, yeah. And then from there, it developed into, we want to buy these houses. So they were bought individually by people. And the McWhirter home was my home, and still is. And this all began with the Foussards. Henry collaborated with Jim Paul. Did you know anything about Jim Paul?
Is he the developer of Rawhide?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Well, let me see. I wish I knew it.
And Mountain Shadows,
Mountain
too,
Shadow.
yeah.
That's right.
Jim told me one time at Rawhide, he said, you know, we have to chain our mining cars down or people will steal them in the middle of the night.
Yep. And anyway, all these wonderful people that have come to Carefree made them their homes, and they were all over the place. But that's really the only way I can explain it is that it is a wonderful little place that developed just as a whim, because the people who like to stay at the inn actually bought all these homes, so they are individually owned.
Like I say, every house has a story, you know.
Every house does, yes.
My wife and I bought a house we've been in 45 years. And the neighbor next door, Carl Nagel, I said, Carl, what do you do? He said, well, I got the contracts to rebuild Germany after the war, all the big warehouses. That's how he made his money. And I said, well, why do you have all these rolling shutters on your house? And he seals his house completely up every time they leave in the spring. He says, well, we have a home in Ireland, and we fly over to Ireland, and we have a home there right on the water. And one day a lady came over in a rowboat, and it was Maureen O'Hara. Our next door neighbor came to visit us. So it's very interesting. And I wanted to tell one quick story too. My wife was coming to the post office one time, and a guy pulled out in front of her, and she leaned on the horn of her car, very loud horn, and he gave her kind of a dirty look, and it turned out they were both going to the post office and parked side by side. So my wife gets out of the car, and this big hulking gentleman about 6'4" gets out, and he looks at my wife and her car, and he says, boy, you have a loud horn, lady. Turns out he became a good friend. It was Lou Menck, the CEO of Burlington Northern Railroad, who's used to train horns. So that shows you how loud.
And he lived at the estates.
Oh, did he?
He did.
Yeah, Lou and Louise, they were great friends, and I used to joke with them. I used to hop trains as a hobo. I told him, you never caught me when you were on the, but he started in the caboose and went all the way to the head of and helped with the merger of Burlington Northern with Santa Fe. And if you go to Fort Worth, Texas today, the world headquarters of the BNSF Railroad, one of the largest, is on Lou Menck Boulevard. Well, listen, all these stories you've heard tonight remind us of the need for an oral history. So many of the people we would have loved to have had here, Kattni Bowes and Ambassador Robert Strauss, the heir to Macy's, all the people, the gentlemen, Colonel Sissy gentlemen, they've all passed on. And a lot of the attraction of Carefree was that people loved to be out here because nobody knew they were here. And we lost a lot of that history. And there are some people who would like to keep it alive. If you have a story of Carefree and you wanted to get on the archives, get a digital reminder of it, would you please contact Madison Garrett? She is the communications director for the town of Carefree. If you call the town center, and they will set you up to interview as an oral history your stories of Carefree. So a lot of this will not be lost because a lot of it is not written down. It's just, this went on YouTube and it's gone. But I want to thank you very much. And remember, we have a reception over there in the hall. I think, is it about time? We're going to go over to the reception, complimentary wine, finger food from the 1980s, ladies and gentlemen.
Martha.
Thank you for coming to our program, and we'll talk to you then.
What was the name of the fellow who was the...
Thank you. Everybody did a good job. I was just trying to juggle the time, you know.
yeah, you did a
Thank
great
you,
job.
Bill. Thank you.